Today we are at the ring out on a Sunday for the Victoria West race. This is in the CFHU hall. I want to explain to the people who donated pigeons to us for the auction where we raise funds towards our juniors. With them is Mr. Ricardo Webinar, who don't need any introduction, currently leading the points in the combine as well as in the CFHU union and leading the car points in the back section of the federated board. So what Mr. Ricardo Webinar will be doing, he will be explaining to our juniors, which we've bought, some food that will be handed out to them, as well as a medication, a 7-in-1 medication, just to uplift them so that they can compete against the other junior fences in the board. As you can see, we've bought them all junior clocks, electronic clocks, and that is all thanks to the people that assisted us by donating pigeons and buying pigeons from us. What I will be doing, Ricardo will be handing out now the medication to them and he will explain them what to do. I just want to mention the names of the people that donated pigeons to us for the auction in the fundraising, as well as those who bought pigeons from us. This is just to honor you and thank you for what you've done for our organization. The first one was, the donor was Zeterans, Zohair Molana. He's also the buyer of the pigeon. He bought his own pigeon back. Then we've got a Mr. LaRue, and the buyer was Ambi. The next donor was Mr. Warren Charles, and the buyer was Mr. Kada Ahmed. Then we've got Mr. Carl Swamstead, who donated a pigeon, and the buyer was Mark. Next one was Mr. Andre Pandy, and the buyer was Zeterans. Then it was the next donor was Mr. Theo Langtree, and the buyer was Muhammad Noor. Then it's Mr. Colin Brady, who's also a member of the CFHU, and the buyer was Dion. Donor Journeys In was last year our union champion, donated a pigeon, and the buyer was Mr. Ricky Webinar, who's currently leading the point. Don't need introduction to the organization. Then the next donor was Mr. Kada Ahmed, and the buyer was Ambi. Our next donor was Mr. Greg Ferrier, and the buyer was Ibrahim Sharma. Then again, pigeon donated by Mr. Kada Ahmed, and the buyer was Wayne Martin. And the next donor was Bergen O'Brien, and the buyer was Yeminia Lofts. Then we've got another donor, which is a member of our union, Mr. Isaac and Son. The buyer was Kasim for Vlonka. And then we've got Mr. George Reed that donated 2 pigeons to us, and the buyer was Earl. Another one of Mr. George Reed, and the buyer was Noel Solomons. Then we've got a donor by the name of Mr. Alan Sampson, and the buyer was Shafiq Modin. Then we've got Mr. U.R. Smith, who donated a pigeon to us, and the buyer was Kasim for Vlonka. And then there was another CFHU, Noor Samuels, racing under the name 4 Seasons, and the buyer was Shafiq. Then we've got Mr. Yazid Murat, who donated pigeon to us, and the buyer was Shafiq. Another fancier, Mr. Jay Roeder, currently a member of the CFHU union, and the buyer was Mr. Ibrahim Sharma. Then we've got a donor, Espling and Son, and the buyer was Yanni Brandt. Next donor was Mr. T. Smith, buyer Noor Samuels. Next donor was Marcus and Partner, member of CFHU, and the buyer was Ziad. Then we've got Jonkerlofs, who was donated a pigeon to us, and the buyer was Shafiq Modin. Next donor was Mr. Faisal Musawal, and the buyer was Emil. Then we've got a donor, Mr. Wajid Rasul. The buyer was unknown, he didn't want to disclose his name. Then the next donor was Hentu Hayman, and the buyer was Alan. Next one, Hentu Main, buyer Peter Dawson. Then we've got Nigel September of Mitchell's Plain FBHU that donated a pigeon, and the buyer was Noor Samuels. Then we've got Peter Dawson who donated a pigeon to us, and Dawood Sain was the buyer. So that concludes the people that all donated young birds to us towards our auction that we have, an annual auction at year end, and we're looking forward for them to assist us again, and you can see the good work that we're doing. And may I just explain to you the current racing results of our juniors. 3 of our juniors, one is Chris Vermeulen Jr., Donnell Jr., the other one is Ibrahim, which raced under his father's name, King's Landing Jr., and then we've got Anik Samai, that is also racing with his dad, Kashif Samai. The 3 of them already won the truck in the junior section, which is very good for the people at the back. So I just want to take you around and show you the fanciers here at the ring out of the Victoria West, which was flown today on Sunday. This is Mr. Kashif Samai. That is Chris Vermeulen. That is the 2 fathers of the juniors that won the truck. We've got Mr. Eckert, that is Journey's End. Racing as Journey's End, Said Damon, last year's CFHU champion. This is the people that do our pannier prep every week, the McDonald brothers. This is our race secretary, Mr. Noor Majid. This is one of the fanciers that bought 2 pigeons on our sale, Mr. Kasim Vovlonka. And this gentleman here, which I'm very proud of, Mr. Brady, who's currently the guy that is sitting by the ring stretcher that is recording all the pigeons, and he volunteered to do this job for the whole season. Thank you, Mr. Brady. Then I've got Mr. Said McDonald, which is doing the pannier prep for us every week. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Fasagi, Mr. Fuad Luther, Mr. Dula Davids. These are all members racing in the CFHU. Just going around, showing our fanciers currently racing with us. This is Ahmad Farrell's racing as Sugarloaf Lofts. The gentleman here still owes us a video, which is Zohir Molana, racing under the name Zeterans. He was the winner of last week's Federation second in the combine. Next to him is Bertram Faru, racing as Faru Magic, winner of 2 federations in the CFHU. Then we've got King's Landing, who is the father of King's Landing Jr. that also won the truck in the junior races. Then we've got Clive Fortuin, who is our ring steward, busy with the rings, selling rings to the fanciers, to the members. Then we've got Mr. U.R. Smith, Mr. Jay Roeder, and Mr. Warren Charles. I'm sure he's no stranger to the pigeon world. This is Ziad, racing under the name Z30, CFHU member. Then we've got Mr. J.L. Williams, also a member of the CFHU, winner of a combine last year, the Bloemfontein combine, in the CWM section. I'll take you to the other members now. Here's the guys busy with the ring out, working the results. Mr. Ibrahim Sharma, also one of our fanciers that raced very well, won a federation this year. Then we've got Mr. Marcus and partner, no introduction to him, he won the combine last week. And then we've got the race secretary who also takes care of all 3 the unions at the back. He is the assistant race secretary to the FBHU, Mr. Rashid Juris. Lastly, I just want to explain what is happening here. We're calling up times now for the juniors first, before we go over to the senior racing members. This is our secretary sitting here, very shy lady, the wife of King's Landing, racing under the name. This is Mrs. Azza Davids.
5 to 4.
Mr. Riyad Najjar, racing under Penlos, is currently not here this evening. He had to leave early. Then we've got Mr. Ali Manuel, racing under the Matupalos.
5 past 4. 10 past 4. Quarter past 4. 20 past 4. 16 past 21. 21 past 4.
That concludes our video in honor of our juniors and to thank the people that donated and bought pigeons on our sale. Thank you.